First of all, welcome to this event. Obviously, it's online rather than actually in Parliament, although as you can see from my office window, I am personally in Parliament. So that's your connection tonight. Hopefully another time we can meet together in Parliament as we have in the past. It must now be 2 years ago, I think, since we last had this event in Parliament. And I mean, I have to say it's a big part of my calendar. It now is Red Wednesday. It's something that's kind of fixed in my mind and in my diary. And so a big welcome to everybody along. And just introduce myself first. My name's John Mason. I'm MSP for Glasgow Shettleston, which is in the east end of Glasgow. For those of you that know it, it includes Celtic Park and one or two other smaller football grounds. But one of the reasons I'm interested in this whole field of persecuted church and how Christians are faring around the world is because I lived in Nepal for 3 years in the 1980s, which is obviously quite some time ago now. But at that time in Nepal, it was against the law to change your religion. So there was not persecution of Christians in the church, but there was certainly the church was under pressure. And people were in prison at that time because either they changed their faith or especially pastors and priests and ministers for baptizing people. So that gave me just a little bit of experience of what it was like to not have the freedom that we have in this country. And now I'm in Parliament, and we have a cross-party group in Parliament, which we can talk more about that later if people want, but that is focused on freedom of religion or belief, not just Christian belief, but a lot of our time is spent in that. And Aid to the Church in Need is one of the organisations, one of the key organisations that's a member of this cross-party group. And we meet several times a year and consider the situation in different countries around the world as we are doing tonight. So again, welcome, can I especially welcome, I think there's at least one other MSP, which is Claire Adamson, who's on tonight. The setup we have is not everybody can see each other, but we will be able to chat and ask questions. If I could just say some of the practical issues before we get into the main part of the meeting. Everyone can take part, not by seeing and speaking, but by asking questions. Now, there's two functions on. Some of us are used to perhaps using the chat function, and you can use that. The chat function is really for comments. So if you want to make a comment, something good, or if you're having any problem hearing or anything like that, please use the chat function. But we also have a Q&A function, and you should find that at the bottom of your screen if it's anything like mine. So that's question and answer, and that's where we'd like people to put questions they have. And there'll be at least 3 of us taking questions, but I think most of them will probably be for John Newton, who will be speaking later, and I will introduce him later. But you can do that at any time through the evening. You can put in questions, and our Q&A session will be towards the end of our time. But as I said, otherwise, if you've just got a comment to make, hopefully positive, but even if it was negative, or by all means use the chat function for that. Now Claire Sweeney, who I will also introduce later properly, but she's in the background helping with all the IT side, and she will interrupt me if I get something wrong or forget one of the things I've not said that I'm meant to be. One of the key things I was to say is that this meeting is being recorded tonight. Now again, that shouldn't affect most people because most people are not being seen, but just to flag up to you and warn you that it is being recorded, and that means that you can go back and look at it again, or other people, maybe if you have a good experience tonight, you can tell friends and people in the churches to have a look at it later on as well. I think some of the things we're going to hear tonight are going to be challenging, are going to be difficult to hear, difficult to see. We're going to be seeing a couple of videos, as well as having John Newton as our main speaker. But the first person I want to introduce to take part this evening is Lorraine Mcmahon. Now, anyone who's been involved with Aid to the Church in Need or been at meetings will have heard Lorraine often speaking at meetings and speaking at churches, and I just heard that apparently today she was speaking at a meeting in Glasgow actually today and had a slight accident and hurt her finger. So our concerns are with Lorraine. Now Lorraine's title, if I get it right, is Head of Operations in Scotland, which sounds quite grand. But I'll just hand straight over to you, Lorraine, from this point on.
Thanks, John. It's just as well I don't need my finger to talk, isn't it? So good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining ACN on Red Wednesday and for showing an interest in our 2021 report, Hear Her Cries. And thank you to you, John, for sponsoring us again for the event and hosting it for us. It's greatly appreciated. And hopefully next year, as John said, we'll be able to shake hands and see you all face to face. But I would like to say that since our last Red Wednesday report, that the persecution of Christians and other minority faith groups had improved. But unfortunately, I cannot. Tonight, Dr. John Newton will present specific case studies to you that will highlight how bad life is for some young women around the world. A number of charities have investigated and researched the question, are young women of minority faith groups particularly susceptible to rape, kidnap, and forced conversion? Charities such as Aid to the Church in Need in the UK, Open Doors in the UK, Christian Association in Nigeria, Movement of Solidarity and Peace in Pakistan. In all cases, the answer was yes. Young women from minority faith groups are particularly susceptible to attack. Fundamentalist group Boko Haram have been quoted saying, "We are going to put into action new efforts to strike fear into Christians of the power of Islam by kidnapping women." It may be said that it's not the normal good living people in the offending countries that are carrying out the attacks. It is fundamentalists who are responsible. Whilst this is true, it's not the fundamentalist groups who are in government in the offending countries. According to Open Doors, 90% of the 50 countries on the Persecution World Watch list have attacks and forced conversion on young women. Some countries that we in the UK trade with and support. As a country and as individuals, we have a duty to stand up and give a voice to the voiceless. The injustice and the suffering of young women in countries that are guilty of allowing the attacks to continue is intolerable, offensive, and a breach of their human rights. But so also is the indifference shown by some in our UK government and by the citizens in our country and our media. We have to turn that indifference to love. We must give a voice to the voiceless. We must petition our MPs, our ministers, and MSPs to take action. We all have a part to play. Please join ACN in our fight to raise awareness of Myra Shabazz and all the other wives, sisters, daughters, nieces, and granddaughters who suffer silently in our world. Please remember in your thoughts and your prayers, Myra Shabazz, Rania Abda Almasi, Mariam Kamil Abdo, Magda Mansour Ibrahim, Rita Habib, Rana, Anna, Rebecca, Ruth Nigladar Pogu, Sadeya Amos, Farah Shaheen, Neelam Masi. Please allow yourself to hear their cries. Thank you.
I should learn by this time to unmute myself. Thanks very much, Lorraine. And I mean, just that list of names is quite challenging, I find, just in itself. Even its names, we don't know much about these people, but just hearing them listed like that. And I think this is the theme tonight, is the number of women, especially young women, not exclusively, but as a group. That's what the focus is on this evening, especially from a Christian faith. And it's clear to Aid to the Church in Need that the Christian faith and Christians around the world are the ones who are being most persecuted. Clearly other faiths are as well, Muslims in Myanmar and that kind of thing. But Christians is clearly the most persecuted faith, and it's particularly women and young women who are most at risk. And I think we'll be hearing more about that, and in fact from some of these young women later on this evening. And countries like Egypt, Nigeria, Pakistan, all slightly different, and yet a similar theme running through, that so many women are falling victim to acts of persecution, violence, largely because of their faith. And for this year's Aid to the Church in Need, the report, Hear Her Cries, which is what we're officially launching tonight. I've just been glancing through it, but I mean, even reading some of the material in there is quite difficult and quite challenging. And we read about kidnapping, forced conversion, sexual victimization of Christian women and girls. And as I say, later on, we'll be having a couple of videos. But first of all, no, sorry, we are, got myself mixed up here. We are having a video right now, and that Aid to the Church in Need prepared this video, which we'll see now.
Around the world, Christian women and girls are being kidnapped and forced to abandon their faith before being sexually abused, often under the outward show of marriage. Aid to the Church in Need's Hear Her Cries report reveals a catalogue of horrors suffered by women who are vulnerable, both because of their sex and because of their faith. Victims often remain silent, fearing social shame or threats from their abductors. In other cases, authorities, including police, enforce silence. In Pakistan, Christians could comprise up to 70% of minority faith girls and women forcibly converted and married every year. And in Nigeria, Christians could make up to 95% of women and girls being held by extremists. In conflict situations, such as the Islamist insurgencies in the Middle East and parts of Africa, minority women suffer higher rates of sexual exploitation. The attacks on Christian women in countries like Mozambique, Nigeria, Iraq and Syria can be regarded as genocidal. These are designed to destroy the local Christian community. Similar motives apparently underlie cases of kidnapping in Egypt. A former kidnapper said girls are groomed or abducted and passed to hardline Salafist groups who force them to convert. And, as Aid to the Church in Need's Hear Her Cries report illustrates, each of these tragedies has a human face. Myra was walking near her home in Medina town, Pakistan, when she was dragged into a car. Her abductors raped her, recording the incident on video, and blackmailed her into signing papers saying she had converted to Islam and married her abductor. Myra managed to escape, but her abductor and his supporters called on her to be killed for apostasy. After being seized in northeast Nigeria, Rebecca was forced to marry a Boko Haram fighter. She was beaten ruthlessly for refusing to sleep with him, flogged with 98 strokes every day, made to dig a hole for 3 weeks, and interred in a pit for 4 days. He finally forced himself upon her, but she managed to escape, walking over 3 weeks to find freedom. Today, Rebecca is being supported by the church in a project backed by Aid to the Church in Need. And these are not isolated examples. We need to act for the sake of girls and women like Myra and Rebecca. We need to help those persecuted for their faith and sexually targeted because of their gender. We need to champion their cause. We need to hear their cries.
So that was a brief introduction to the report that we're going to be hearing more about now. And some of the people who are mentioned in that video, we'll at least 2 of them are going to hear more about from them directly later on. So if I can now introduce Dr. John Newton. John is the Senior Press Officer for Aid to the Church in Need UK. And part of his role has been writing reports like this one, Hear Her Cries, and previously Persecuted and Forgotten. And he has travelled extensively and reported back from some of these countries where there's been, sometimes it's been a war situation, sometimes it's just a general ongoing problem country, including Nigeria, Pakistan, Sudan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon. And tonight, John's going to, I think, introduce the report and tell us a bit more about it. As I say, I've just been glancing at it myself, but just reading 1 or 2 stories challenged me. So, John, I'll hand over to you now, and you can take us on for the next section. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here tonight to be able to talk about the injustice that faces women who are kidnapped, sexually violated, and forced to convert. It's a strong topic, as John said, but it's a very important one. But I'm very aware that you've not really logged on tonight to hear from me. It's not my voice that you want to hear. It's the voices of the women and girls who have suffered these outrageous crimes. The voices of girls like Myra Shabazz, who was walking near her home in Medina town, northeastern Pakistan, when the 14-year-old was seized and bundled into a car. She was blindfolded and taken to her abductor's house, where she was tortured and raped. The sexual assault was recorded on video, and they used the footage to blackmail Myra. They forced her to sign documents saying that she had converted to Islam and married her abductor. She even testified to this effect when her case went to court. As if the footage wasn't enough of a hold over her, her abductor told her that if she didn't say that she had freely converted and married, he would have her family killed. But Myra was underage. At just 14, she was too young to marry or convert. Even with her testimony, the law should have found against her abductor. It didn't. After months with her abductor, Myra finally managed to make a break for it. Around midnight one night, she managed to slip out of the house when everyone was asleep. She made a run for it and eventually reported her case to the police, saying that she had been abducted and coerced. You might think that that would have been the end of her nightmare, but it wasn't. Her abductor and his supporters, including members of hardline groups, have called on Myra to be killed for apostasy because this Christian girl has rejected her forced conversion to Islam. Her family, Myra, her mother, and her sisters are in hiding, living in just one room, fearing for their lives. Men have been seen going door to door asking about their whereabouts. they are not safe. At the end of last year, Aid to the Church in Need organised a petition calling on Boris Johnson to grant her asylum. Members of ACN have met with the Home Secretary Priti Patel to discuss the case, but there are still hurdles. Myra's marriage is still valid under Pakistan law, and until that is resolved, it would be seen as difficult for her to get asylum. But Myra's scared of returning to court. She's scared of facing her abductor. She's terrified that his supporters will use that opportunity to make good their threats to kill her and her family. So they remain in hiding. They remain living in just one room, fearing for their lives, with men still going door to door asking for their whereabouts. As I said at the beginning, it's not my voice that you want to hear. It's the voice of Myra. But Myra cannot be here. Tonight she'll be hiding in that room, worried that the next knock on the door might spell their doom. She cannot be with us to tell her story, so I'm having to tell it for her. And I'm a poor substitute for this courageous girl who's undergone so much, and probably still has so much more to undergo before she's safe. And then there's the story of Rania, a school teacher who vanished from Mina village in northern Egypt. Her husband and 3 children were distraught when she disappeared. They reported her disappearance to police the following day. And then a few days later, a video was released on social media. In it, Rania, a devout Christian who had been very active in her local Coptic Orthodox church, appeared wearing a Muslim headscarf and claiming that she had converted to Islam 9 years previously. In the video, she claimed that she had left home of her own free will, taking her jewelry with her, and she recited the Islamic profession of faith and asked her husband and family to stop looking for her. Now, her family were extremely suspicious, as much of what she had said in the video was untrue. None of her jewelry was missing. Her family believed she had been threatened and coerced to make the video. They also claimed that police knew where she was being held. Now, no progress was made in the case until early May of that year, when the Menufir Assembly of Priests released a statement urging authorities to take action. 3 weeks later, when there was no still sign of any action or any movement in the case, the Assembly stated that until steps were taken to secure her return, they would be withdrawing from Bet al-Ayla, which is a government-backed interfaith initiative, and they were critical of this interfaith initiative for failing to make a single statement in support of this woman. The church kept the pressure on. In June, officers arrested 15 Copts participating in a peaceful sit-in in Mina village. Somewhat ironically, they were protesting against police inaction. They were released the following day. Next month, on the 15th of July, all their efforts paid off. Rania was finally set free. Pictures of her back home with her family went viral on social media, as did her declaration that she had never converted to Islam. And although no details of her disappearance were made public at the time, Al-Azhar, the Islamic authority which registers conversion to Islam, released a telling statement. They said she had not converted, as in Islam, there can be no compulsion in religion. The family said no more. Rania did not speak about her ordeal publicly, and there are reasons for that, which I will now describe. Bishop Benjamin, the local Coptic Orthodox bishop, whose diocese had been so active in campaigning for her return, did speak about the case. The bishop related the story that she had told to him. Rania had indeed been kidnapped. She was forced into a car by 2 women. She was held for almost 3 months, and during that time, she was sexually and psychologically abused. Damningly, the bishop said that police had told the family not to talk publicly about the case, and that's not unusual. Most of those returned to their families in Egypt do indeed remain silenced. Their release seems to be conditional on the family not speaking out, not pressing charges, and not seeking to find out exactly who the kidnappers were. It would be great if you could hear the voice of Rania or someone like her, but a cloak of secrecy descends in the cases where abducted women are returned. Their voices are effectively silenced. And if people like me or people like you don't speak up, no one is going to hear their voices. Many girls in Egypt never see their families again, as in so many countries, it is nigh impossible to get a real sense of the scale of these atrocities going on in Egypt. But what we do know is that such activities are often carried out by criminal kidnapping gangs. One former member of one of these gangs in Egypt, a gang that targets Christian girls, revealed that these abductions are meticulously orchestrated. He said, "They weave a spider's web around the girls." Most of them are pastor members of Islam's hardline Salafist movement who force them to convert. And once they reach the legal age, a specially arranged Islamic representative comes in to make the conversion official. The former gang member also said that kidnappers are paid very well by these groups, and he claimed that police conspire. They report the young women as missing rather than abducted. They effectively play down the crime. These girls are taken from their families, sometimes living as little more than slaves, and they have no voice either. They have vanished from the face of the earth, leaving only silence behind them. It is to give survivors like Myra and Rania some sort of voice that we put together our Hear Her Cries report. The report tells their stories, stories that they themselves cannot tell. And it is vitally important that the world is aware of cases like these, where young women are taken from their families by force, made to renounce their faith, and forced to enter into sexual relations with their abductors. As I said, it is hard to assess the precise scale of this problem. There is widespread underreporting, and that means the full scale of the crisis remains largely hidden. And the reluctance of authorities to get involved, or as I mentioned, in some cases, the complicity of the authorities in covering up these crimes, makes it nigh impossible to determine how many girls suffer every year. These difficulties are compounded as in many cases, victims and their families remain silent. They fear social shame, or in some cases, they fear threats from their abductors. But we know that the number of women and girls who are abducted is significant. If we just look at Pakistan, one calculation suggests that in Pakistan, up to 1,000 girls from religious minorities, particularly the Christian and Hindu communities, are seized every year. But another figure suggests the same number of girls, 1,000, are taken in Sindh province alone. Girls as young as 12 are abducted. Now, in the face of these terrible crimes, it would be a very fair question to ask, what is Aid to the Church in Need doing about these situations? Are we just highlighting them, or are we actually trying to make a difference? Well, at the beginning of this year, Aid to the Church in Need announced its support for a new initiative, which is trying to tackle the growing crisis of Christian and Hindu girls who are being abducted and sexually abused in Pakistan. The initiative, which is being driven forwards by the National Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace, engages with politicians and other decision makers at both state and national level to try and address some of the root causes of these problems. It also promotes community awareness so that people are more aware that this problem is happening, and it provides legal help for the victims. There are also a number of other projects around the world where we are helping survivors. Later tonight, you'll hear Rebecca's story. Mercifully, she managed to escape from her captors, and while her journey of healing has taken a long time, she is now free to tell her story. Unlike so many women, she is able to speak out about what happened to her. And tonight she will do just that. The Human Resource and Skill Acquisition Centre in Maiduguri, northern Nigeria, has been helping women, including Rebecca. A number of these women have been raped and given birth to children fathered by Boko Haram fighters. Most of these women have escaped from Boko Haram and suffered terrible trauma. With local authorities having done very little to address the emotional and psychological needs of survivors, the church has stepped in. The centre is providing psychological and spiritual counselling to address the trauma these women underwent while they were held by Boko Haram. The centre also teaches these women a trade. Many of those supported by the centre were widowed. Their husbands were killed by Boko Haram, and they need to be able to support themselves and their families. Rebecca's case is a bit different from those I've described so far, as she was seized by an armed extremist group. But again, we see the same pattern. Women are kidnapped, forced to marry, forced to change their religion. Now, in these situations, where it is extremist groups who target Christian women and girls, this can be classified as genocide, as the jihadists targeting them have the intention to destroy the minority faith communities. And they make no secret of this fact. In Nigeria, Boko Haram has been very vocal about its intention to drive out Christians, to eradicate them from northeastern Nigeria. The same is the case of the extremist group variously known as Daesh or ISIS. It would not tolerate other religious groups, particularly those that it saw as being heretical or in some way incompatible with their own beliefs. We saw this in parts of Iraq and Syria. Women from religious minorities, including Yazidis and Christians, were forced to become wives and slaves for Daesh fighters and their supporters. One such woman was Rita Habib. As Daesh was forcing its way across the Nineveh Plains in 2014, taking control of the towns and villages as it went, Rita left her elderly father and went to arrange the necessary paperwork so that they could seek sanctuary in Turkey. They feared what would happen if their hometown of Karakosh was overrun by the extremists. Unfortunately, the night she returned home with all the paperwork arranged was the same night that Daesh attacked Karakosh. She found herself fighting her way through a stream of people trying to flee the city to make her way back home to her father. They planned to leave early the following morning. They thought there would be enough time to escape. But they awoke to find that the Peshmerga fighters protecting the town had withdrawn, and the black flag of Daesh was now flying in the streets. Daesh had captured the town, and those who remained were made to gather in the central square. Daesh separated the people into young and old, men and women, and Rita was put in a group that was taken to Mosul. Mosul is another of the large cities on the Nineveh Plains. It was the first to fall to Daesh. There she was bought by a Daesh sympathizer living at that time in the city. Rita has said in her own words, "I was sold to Emir Abu Mus'ab al-Iraqi. In his home, there was also a Yazidi girl from Sinjar named Shatta. She was only 14 years old. He raped both of us over and over again." Rita and the young Yazidi girl were also tortured psychologically by the Emir. She said, "He made us watch videos with terrorists slaughtering non-Muslims. In one of them, they were beheading Shatta's brother." Like many women, Rita found herself passed from man to man. She was then sent to Raqqa in Syria, where she was sold to a Saudi Arabian gentleman. Again, she described her experience. "Abu Khalid was married to a woman from Morocco. I was beaten and tortured by her every day. She would not give up until I was bleeding. They threatened to kill me if I did not convert to Islam." Then Rita was moved again to the border between Syria and Iraq. She lived with another man. 16 months later, she was moved yet again and taken to a slave auction to be sold on yet again. But there, members of the Assyrian and Chaldean diaspora, posing as jihadists, brought her freedom, as they were doing for a number of women from their own community. She was able to be reunited with her father, and she is one of the very few Christian women who has been brave enough to speak about her experience. It is unknown exactly how many Christian women were forced into slavery by Daesh. Hundreds of Christian women were probably seized, which you might think pales into insignificance, given that thousands of Yazidi women were taken. Many of these Christian women are probably still in captivity. Many of the Yazidis certainly are. The families of the Christians are reluctant to talk about the missing women, and the few who have escaped from Daesh don't want to speak about their experiences either. Archbishop Seaman told us that shame and fear of judgment plays a significant part. He said it is a matter of social scandal, or they have the fear that people will talk about them. They won't say anything because they are ashamed and don't want to talk about it. Rita's story is just the tip of the iceberg. She spoke out, but there are so many untold tales. Similarly, the stories in Hear Her Cries give the merest hint of a problem whose true scale is unknown, because the women do not or cannot speak out, and their voices remain unheard. If there is one message that this report has, it is that we need to act for the sake of girls and women like Myra, Grania, and Rita. We need to help those persecuted for their faith and targeted because of their sex. We need to champion their cause, and despite all the efforts to silence them, we need to ensure that the world hears their cries. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, John. I mean, it's just difficult listening to some of that, and thank you seems inappropriate words, but thank you for sharing all of that. And I take your point that, you know, if we heard from the people themselves, that would be even more moving and challenging. So we are going to do that now by video and have a couple of testimonies from folk. The first one of the countries John mentioned there, Nigeria. And the first one is the woman Rebecca, who was mentioned, and she's been able to share something of her story on film for us to see. She was taken prisoner by Boko Haram, and she was forced to marry one of the soldiers. She only speaks Hausa, so there will be translation by a Father Joseph, who runs a counselling program that has been helping her and her family and others to get through what they have experienced. And Nigeria is an interesting country because in the church I go to, we certainly have Nigerians there, and I'm sure many of those watching will also have Nigerian members there. And I was just checking up on some of the figures. Nigeria is the 7th most populous country in the world. It has about 200 million people, and it's roughly split with more Muslims in the north, about 100 million, and more Christians in the south, another 100 million. And a lot of these stories are coming from the north. And so I'm sure most Christians in Nigeria are aware of these things, but the problems often are more in the north, where there's a Muslim majority and the Christians are under even more pressure. So, I mean, this is a very short video. We'll not go into all the detail of what Rebecca suffered. One of the worst things that was her young son was thrown into Lake Chad and sadly drowned there, and other things which she'll touch on perhaps, but not go into a great deal of detail. But I'll hand over now to Claire's going to show us the video.
When they came into Baga in the evening, they started shooting sporadically. So they came, and when I saw that, I asked my husband to run away because they were after capturing men. When he ran away, they came and picked my children and picked me away as well.
Arrived at the camp, they forced each one of us to have a husband. But I told them that I'm a Christian and I'm already married to another man. But they said my husband is an infidel and he will not lead me to paradise. Therefore, they forced me to take one of the men there, and they tortured me. When I saw that I was suffering so much, I decided to keep myself away. However, because of the way they forced me, I took in for the man, became pregnant, and I delivered a child that was his own. I refused to marry him, and because of my refusal, they took one of my children, threw him into a small lake, took one of the other child and sold him out into slavery, and by that then they forced me to marry him.
They made me to suffer and do all forms of civil work. I did all domestic work like cleaning their houses, washing plates, washing their clothes, and yet I could not even be allowed to feed and eat because I was a Christian. They suffered me and tortured me a lot.
I refused to marry him. They therefore forced me and tortured me, put me in a prison, and discovered I was still not willing to give up. They also put me in another underground prison. Oftentimes they will beat me and make me do some work, domestic work in the house, like cleaning and fetching water. And that was how I continued. But with the help of God, I continued to endure and hold on to my resolve not to marry him. It was in the evening when they were praying, having their evening prayer. While they were having evening prayer, I gathered my children to myself, picked them. That day, the military came also to attack the camp. When I heard of the attack, I took a different direction and began running. As I ran, I came into a community, a Fulani community, and they too were scared and thought that I had come as a suicide bomber to kill them. But I had explained to them that no, I too have been a victim, a kidnapped person abducted by Boko Haram. They asked about me and my children, and I explained to them. Thereupon, they asked me to follow a different direction because they had earlier on attacked one of the communities close to them. When I ran away, I came to a small stream. When I was about to cross, it was very difficult for me to cross. And a man saw me trying to cross, and he told me how dangerous it was to cross. I had wanted to leave the Boko Haram child I had, which is Chris. However, the man that saw me asked me what was I doing, and my child also asked me to pick the other child and continue. I had explained to him that it is not my child, it is a result of a union with Boko Haram. He asked me, since it is your child, carry him. In that way, I felt the compassion as a mother, picked the child and crossed the stream, and then came across into Niger, where the process of my reunification with the family began. After my escape, I was eventually brought into Nigeria by the soldiers. The soldiers thought too I was one of the wives of Boko Haram, but I had explained to them that I was abducted and I had lived and even had a child for one of them. They then tried tracing to know where my husband was. They found a community where he was living and brought me through Damaturu into Maiduguri. And there they asked my husband, they identified him and brought him to me and asked him to identify me. He said, yes, I was his wife. They asked him, would he want to marry me? He said, yes, I would marry her. She's my wife, I would take her back. So he took me back with the children. And when he took me with the children, I was under his care. Unfortunately, we fell ill with the kids, but we were treated, and the process of my healing began. And from there, then we said we wanted a house of our own, and we found a house where we are now staying. Because of what has happened to me while I was in captivity, I had suffered a lot. But oftentimes in the sessions I attend, they will tell me, I'm even lucky that I survived this, and they try to help me to understand my own pain and try to see how I can overcome it. And once more, I appreciate the help that those people gave me, because what they did to me has helped me to set up a shop, to start a new life, and to move with my own life onward. But I must be grateful to ACN for what they have done, because they have really helped me. And this awareness they are creating is very important, because it will save a lot of young women. That women are abducted and taken into captivity is a thing of pity and very painful, because they suffer a lot. And so ACN, by creating this awareness, is doing so great, and is trying to bring healing and stop and prevent all these forms of abduction. And so I'm grateful to them, and I ask that the Lord will continue to bless them. This effort by ACN to bring an end to abduction and all forms of forced marriage is a very good thing, especially the leaders among them and other world leaders who are struggling to end this abduction. I am happy to hear that they are making this effort, and I will continue to be grateful to ACN for what they do. I am very grateful, and I hope that these bad practices, this forced abduction, this torture of women will someday come to an end.
Well, thanks again for showing that video. So that was Nigeria, and our final video before we go on to question answer focuses on Pakistan. I see there's one question someone sent in already. So if you have questions, then it would be good to just type them in the Q&A session. I mean, I think John was challenging us earlier about we need to act. So I think that's an area we might explore a little bit as to what that actually would mean in practice. We got a bit of a hint, I think, off that last video. So our next video, which is even shorter, I think, is from a girl in Karachi in Pakistan who was kidnapped, raped, forced to marry a man who was much older than she was. And all of this happened when she was only 13 years of age herself. Again, she escaped, has been in hiding, and perhaps unusually, I think, is actually willing to tell her story, even though she's still at risk. And she wants to know what people, as I think we just heard just now, what people are suffering, what girls are suffering in particular in Pakistan. So although it's a different country, I think some parallels with what we heard before. And she's again being interviewed by a pastor and advocate. So back to you, Claire.
I'm Pastor Zala Shafiq. I'm also working as a human rights activist. I'm here with a young Christian girl who is a victim of forced conversion and forced marriage. Her name is Neha Parvez. One evening, Neha, aged 13, and her family received a visit from her aunt named Sundas. Her aunt asked permission from her mother to take Neha with her to visit her sick son in the hospital, which was actually a lie. She never wanted to take Neha to the hospital. Instead, she was conspiring with her brother, 30 years older than Neha, to get Neha married to him. Sundas and Imran both are Muslims. When Neha's mother granted leave to go with the Aunt Sundas to visit the sick son, when she was going, the aunt took Neha's younger brother Haris also with them. Haris is only 2 years old. She never took her to the hospital. Instead, she was taken to a flat. So I asked Neha what happened when she reached to the flat. When they reached to the flat instead of hospital, she was told that you are getting married to Imran. Remember, Imran is 30 years older than Neha. When she refused that I'm a small girl, I'm a young girl, I don't want to get married. They snatched her brother from her, they beat her, and then they locked her in a room. Then Imran came inside the room and he sexually assaulted her, raped her many times, and then left her locked in the room, and he went outside. So she stayed there overnight, and next morning they took her to an unknown place along with her brother. And there they told her, if you try to talk to anybody or you try to tell your story to anybody, we will kill your brother. So there they gave her some papers to put her signature on those papers. When she wrote her name, Neha Parvez, she was told, no, you are not Neha, you are now Fatma. You are now married, you are a Muslim now, and your age is also 18 years, you are 18 years old. And then they brought her back home. She was locked in the room again, but her brother was sent home back to the mother. And she was kept locked inside the room. She was kept locked in a room. Imran was repeatedly assaulting her, raping her every day. And Imran had a daughter same age as of Neha. She was coming, bringing meals to her 3 times a day, and Mehak saw Neha crying. Mehak felt the pain of Neha, and one day she helped her to escape from there. She gave her money, she gave her the long veil so she can hide herself, and she ran away, or she escaped from that place. Neha was there for almost 6 days. When she got escaped, she reached her home. She told the family that what has happened to her. The family took her to the police station, but police officers refused to help her or the family to report her case. That was the time when I got involved as a human rights activist. I worked for the rights of Christian girls, and I work for the women empowerment here in Pakistan, especially in Karachi. So I helped Neha to get her case registered. It's been 3 years, still litigation is going on. The problem is this, that here the multiple litigation takes place. Instead of all this, Neha is still a wife to Imran. We have filed a case of jacketation or dissolving the marriage. Neha is facing a lot of threats. She has been attacked so many times. She is living a life in hiding. Whenever she goes to whenever she goes to court, she has a threat to her life. I asked Neha, when her life is under threat, why she's telling her story to the world. She's saying it is very painful. I have lost everything. I have lost my family. I have lost my education. I'm living in a hiding. I cannot move freely. I cannot go out. Everything has been taken away from me. So I want the world to know my pain, that no other girl should suffer like me as Neha has suffered. I asked Neha what she wants from the church or from the people to do for her. She wants the church should pray for her. She needs to get her education restarted. She needs to get her reunited with the family. She needs to move freely. She needs all this litigation to get over so she can live an independent and free life. She says it is very painful. No other girl should suffer like this. She wants justice. She wants the world should ask the Pakistani government, please save minority girls. No girl should suffer like Neha has suffered.
Well, thanks again for showing us that video. And I mean, there is something when you actually hear the person who's gone through the experience actually speaking like that. It is incredibly, it's hits home, I think, in a greater way. So now we're going to move on to questions and maybe answers. And as we said, I just see there's a link in the chat for those of you who are watching as to where to actually get the report, because that was one of the questions I was wondering about, how to get the report. So now we know that. John, can I start with a question to you? You know, on the whole kind of legal side of things, I mean, our legal system's not perfect and the police are not perfect, but if you went with a complaint like that to the police, I think they would normally take it up. But I mean, when someone can go to the police with what seems to us like a clear-cut case, and the police won't even process the complaint, let alone do anything with it. I mean, is there any hope in either Nigeria or Pakistan that, you know, that the legal process is a way to go, that we can make any progress through the legal process? Or is it hopeless? And I mean, is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Just around that kind of area. Thanks.
In Nigeria, yes, the government has been making noises that they will be setting up a process to look at the establishment of courts that will specifically concentrate on the crimes of women being attacked and abducted. So it seems in Nigeria they are taking this problem very seriously and they are looking at a legal solution to it. How practical that will be, given that Boko Haram still holds tracts of land in northeast Nigeria, and there is still an ongoing war between the security forces and Boko Haram, is a different question. But certainly in principle, Nigeria is showing a lot of interest in legal resolutions to these problems, to the extent that there are many areas, I think, that one can rightly criticize the Nigerian government for in the handling of the security situation and in the handling of the problems of Boko Haram. But this does seem to be an area where they are taking a particular lead and they are doing particularly well. So to give them credit where credit's due, this is a positive for Nigeria. Pakistan, on the other hand, it's nowhere near as positive. I mean, as you were describing that, it is very different over here. And I think that is illustrated by a story we put out quite recently about a 3-year-old girl who was actually abused. And we were contacted, I think quite rightly, by a journalist that said, 3 years old, this is quite awful. Surely you shouldn't be naming this girl. Surely you shouldn't be giving the details you're giving. You should be preserving this girl's dignity. And that is an excellent question to ask. And it's great that these questions are being asked. But as we try to explain, one of the biggest problems is that if you're in the UK, if that case had happened in the UK, a 3-year-old had been sexually abused, it would go to court. A case would be opened. Whatever horrors there were there, the legal system would be behind that person. And you can understand in that case, you wouldn't want to name them, you wouldn't want to give too many details, you want to preserve their dignity. In Pakistan, the parents of this 3-year-old girl were more concerned about getting the case into court and into the legal process. And because of that, they were happy to waive the basic dignity of their daughter, which in the West, we would be very concerned about upholding. That's how difficult it is to even get these cases into the legal system. And once they are in the legal system, as we heard tonight, the poor young lady whose problem is getting her marriage unrecognized. That's also Myra's problem at the moment, getting the marriage unrecognized. In the case of Myra, there is a legal document by an imam saying she has been married. The imam himself says the document has been forged. He says the signature is not his own. He did not conduct the marriage. The marriage is not legal as far as he is concerned. The courts have not yet ruled that marriage invalid. And so for many of these girls, they still have these legal problems. You'd think the courts might be supporting them. You know, it's gone so far. They have had the fact that they have been abducted largely recognized. They've had their problems largely recognized, but it's still an uphill struggle in the legal process. And the whole campaign, I was speaking about the Catholic, the CCJP, the Catholic Commission for Justice and Peace in Pakistan. They are trying to get some of these questions addressed. They are trying to get resolutions. They are trying to get things moving and changed, as indeed have other human rights activists in Pakistan, often at state level. In places like Sindh, there have been moves to try and get these issues addressed. But there is resistance, there is reluctance, and it is an uphill struggle. And yes, in certain states of Pakistan, you are not assured of justice if you are a young woman who has been abducted and abused in this way, and you have a fight on your hands to get your case into the courts and a fight on your hands to get your case justly resolved by the courts.
And John, I mean, the woman, I didn't quite catch her name, but she was a kind of, I think, a pastor and a legal rights activist. And I mean, she came across very well. And I mean, she obviously made a difference by helping the family because that gave them expertise. I mean, are there many people like her in Pakistan, or is that very unusual?
There are quite a few. There are quite a few. The problem at the moment in Pakistan is that it tends to be individuals that take on cases. Individuals like the pastor we saw earlier. In the case of Myra, there was a particular human rights advocate that we had contact with at Aid to the Church in Need, who was trying to look after her case after she'd been abducted, and we were in contact with him, and it was through his efforts that the case really became known to us, and then we were able to highlight it. And the work the CCJP is doing is trying to, for the first time, a bigger organization is trying to get some of this advocacy going on. But yes, by and large at the moment, it is isolated individuals who are hearing of these cases, who are getting involved in these cases, and who are doing the best that they can for these girls.
Thanks. Right, now we have a question from M. McLeod, and the question is, well, I'll just read the whole thing. Thank you for your powerful advocacy, John. Is Aid to the Church in Need in a position to provide a larger safe house for Myra Shabazz and family? Because I think they were all in a small room, if I got that correctly. Also, is there an update on Myra's attempt to secure asylum settlement in a safe country?
Yeah, I mean, to answer those two very specific questions, because I think Claire's going to say a bit more about the general updates later. There are a number of organizations which are supporting Myra in different ways. Aid to the Church in Need has been giving some support, other organizations giving other support. We are not actually responsible for the housing of Myra at the moment. That is being done by a local independent church in Pakistan. The trouble is, a bit as in the case of Asia Bibi, where you need an out-of-the-way location, where you need somewhere fairly private, where you need somewhere that's going to be out of the radar of the people who are trying to find them. Inevitably, you're not going to be looking at larger properties or larger spaces where they can live. By the very nature of the security that they need for themselves, they are having to be restricted. So even if it was a bigger room, they would still have the problem that they cannot go out of that room, because if they are seen in the streets, if someone gets an inkling of where they're living, you can guarantee that there's going to be a mob on their doorstep the following morning. So the biggest problem in Myra's case in terms of the accommodation is that they are not secure within the wider society. With regards to the asylum attempts, as I say, that there have been meetings with Priti Patel. There have been, I mean, the Home Secretary herself has actually shown a lot of sympathy for the case. The problem, as far as the UK government is concerned, is the legal implications. There is ongoing legal activity to resolve the case going on in Pakistan, which I spoke about tonight. The marriage is still formally recognised, even though the Imam himself, whose name is on the certificate, says it's a forged document. And while that legal activity has not been resolved, the UK government and indeed other national governments are very, very reluctant to get involved in these processes. And of course, as I described, that becomes a catch-22, because if they go to court, there's going to be trauma, there's going to be vulnerability, and they are fearing violence, because if they go to court, someone can follow them back to where they're living. There are incipient dangers of going to court. But on the other hand, until that court case is resolved, there are difficulties with asylum being considered. So it is a catch-22, and I don't know how you break the deadlock, personally.
Okay, thanks, John. I think I'll move on, if you don't mind, to the next question, which will be partly you, but it may also be, I don't know if Lorraine and Claire are going to come in, or Claire may catch it and are summing up. But this is from my colleague, Claire Adamson, who MSP for, I think it's Motherwell, or that kind of way. Thank you for this event this evening. I agree that thank you does not seem appropriate in the context of these harrowing accounts. Tomorrow is the 30th anniversary of 16 Days of Action global campaign to end gender-based violence. Claire says, I will be thinking of these brave young women during the minute's silence in the Parliament tomorrow. That's at 11:30. What can we do as MSPs to raise awareness in our communities? And that kind of ties in a little bit. I was going to ask Lorraine, actually, how interested she finds the churches are in these kind of issues. Claire, do you want to say anything on this, or will I go to Lorraine first?
No, that's fine. If you just carry on to Lorraine, and then I've got some more summing up to do.
That's great. That's fine. Okay, Lorraine.
Yeah. Okay, so in our communities, in our churches, we get a portion of interested people who will light up red for us, who will hold events for us, and who will do quite a lot. And we get a bit across the UK, but if you look at what that is as a percentage, then it's not a lot. It's an uphill struggle sometimes to get people to actually stand back and take notice. We ask buildings to light up red, but our big challenge then is, how do we get people to know why they're lit up red? So people go by the buildings, yes, they're lit up red, but do they know why? And our challenge is getting our media to pick up the stories and to show and give us the support so that people do know why that they're lighting up red. So even though we can get the community as such to do things, we need that media backup so that people know why it's happening.
And what can Claire, as an MSP, not an ordinary MSP, she's a good MSP, but what can she do to help, do you think?
I think talking to colleagues, trying to get colleagues on board to listen and to support when we do need that backup within Parliament for Red Wednesday, for motions to be put forward for, I know that there's a good part of this where it's the UK government that's responsible for particular aspects, but if we could prod them and put pressure on the UK government to do this, it would be great. So the answer to that really is for Claire and interested parties like her to go into Parliament and promote charities like Aid to the Church in Need and promote the fact that we do need that support and raise that awareness. Yeah.
Okay, that's good, and hopefully we can have you physically in Parliament and
that would be nice.
Meet MSPs before too much longer. I think we are probably going to have to draw this part to a close. this is somebody else has just put this as a comment. Before joining the webinar, I had logged on to St Margaret Ayres prayer service hosted by Bishop Nolan. Congregation was minimal only 18. Okay. Yeah, I'm afraid in all the churches we find sometimes that the prayer services are not always the best attended, but we will finish in prayer tonight. And I think prayer, I would believe, is one of the most useful things we can all do. I think many people watching tonight will be people who pray. So if we can encourage you to do that. So I think now, there's another question come in. I don't know if I have time for this. Claire's just thanking us for the answer. She was hoping to speak tomorrow, but hasn't been chosen. Fair enough. Right, I think now we'll hand over to yourself, Claire, for final session before I wind it up. And I think this is going to be a kind of call for action, maybe some of the practical things we can do. And Claire Sweeney, already people may have seen her, but her title is ACN's Events Manager in Scotland. So she's been managing tonight. And I think the fact so far it's gone very smoothly. So that's thanks to Claire. Claire.
Great, thank you, John. And yeah, so my role is events manager for ACN in Scotland. And really what that means is reaching out to our Scottish schools, our universities, our parishes, to really invite them to engage with us as a charity through our campaigns and through our events. And we offer parish talks and assemblies to share with these communities the plight of those who are persecuted for their faith in our world today. Our schools team have developed a number of school and parish resources and initiatives which you're able to look at on our website. So please, if you're a teacher with us this evening, or if you know any teachers, then please do share these resources with them. And I'd like to extend this invitation to engage further with the work of ACN to you tonight. There are 3 principles that are central really to our work. The first is prayer, second, information, and lastly, action. And our first principle, prayer. Every day, ACN staff gather in our 23 national offices around the world to pray for those who are persecuted for their faith or in pastoral need. And we invite our benefactors through a number of various campaigns we have to join us in prayer. As Neha shared with us tonight, prayer is central to what she is asking for, her needs. Essentially, she's asking us to pray for her. The beneficiaries that ACN support are so grateful for our prayers and often share with us the fact that they are praying for all ACN benefactors and supporters as well. Our second principle is information. So each year we fund over 5,000 projects in more than 140 countries around the world. And that's essentially because of the support of those benefactors that give to our charity. We carry out research and investigation into countries where there's known persecution towards Christians and other faith minorities. And as you've seen tonight, we produce reports annually on this to highlight these issues. So please do have a look at our website, read our case studies, sign up for a copy of our e-news, which is a weekly update on what's going on in these countries in our world, and become informed, and then tell anyone that will listen to you of the plight of persecuted Christians and other faith minorities in the world we live in. And finally, and most importantly, we ask you to take action. So you've joined us tonight and you've already taken that action, and many in the past have supported us as a charity as well, so thank you. Many of you took action last year in signing our ACN petition, calling on the Prime Minister Boris Johnson to grant Myra asylum in the UK. And we had some questions about an update which John has covered in part tonight. And I thought I'd share a bit of a brief update on the situation. Aid to the Church in Need is almost in daily contact with Myra Shabazz and her family, who are living in one room, as has been discussed, in an undisclosed location in Pakistan. Myra's unable to leave this room for reasons of security, and she and her family are relying on charitable support for her daily needs. The charity is continuing to lobby for Myra and her family to be given asylum in the UK, and having had meetings, 2 of them with the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, the charity continues to press her case, cooperating with officials and supported by parliamentarians. Negotiations are at a sensitive stage, and cases of this nature require perseverance and determination to continue pleading the cause of the voiceless, and we remain hopeful of a positive outcome. Finding a safe place in which Myra can live in freedom remains paramount importance to us. In theory, governments that sign up to the UN Declaration of Human Rights are guaranteeing religious freedom to their citizens, especially minority groups. But as we've heard tonight, this is often very different in practice. Many governments are indifferent to religious freedom, meaning that around the world, Christians in particular face harassment, discrimination, kidnap, torture, and often death just because of their faith. In terms of this year's campaign for Red Wednesday, today we had our event in the Parliament in Westminster, as well as our event here in Scotland. And we also have a petition as part of this campaign. And this petition is calling on the UK government and the United Nations to do more to tackle the epidemic of sexual violence against Christian women and girls. And if you've not already done so, we'd invite you to take action and please sign our ACN petition. It's available on our website, and I've shared it in the chat with you this evening. So please do share the link as well with friends and family, invite them to get involved and to sign this petition. Another action might be to write to your MP, your MSP, invite them to sign that petition and to take action. Perhaps the media, as we've said, why Red Wednesday, why do we like red? Try and get that word, spread it out into the wider media. And perhaps it's yourself writing to the local press about what's going on in your community for Red Wednesday and encouraging them to take it on board. And please share again on social media any of our initiatives, and particularly our petitions, so that we can get as many names as possible. And finally, freedom to believe is a hugely undervalued and overlooked basic human right. And our Red Wednesday campaign and events like this evening aim to highlight this right and invite others to join us in using our voice to call for change. So thank you for joining us this evening, and thanks to John as our compere and sponsor for this event. And I'll just hand back to you to finish, John. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Claire, and big thank you to everybody who's watched. We're getting later now, but we're just going to come to a conclusion now. So many thanks for joining us tonight. And as Claire said, let's be talking about this kind of stuff. I fear that many of people in our churches just really aren't aware of what's going on around the world. And the more we can all talk about it and raise the profile, I've been trying to do that in my church. Then the better. And some of these practical things that Claire's given us, another practical thing, if you want, is to come to our cross-party group in Parliament, which I mentioned earlier. And we don't have a lot of powers, but we can write letters. And every so often we do write to either our own government or to an overseas government, perhaps people who've gone missing or some of these issues. So let me at this point pray, and then we'll come to a close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening and just having this information that although we cannot meet in person, we are able to meet online like this and just hear the tremendous amount of work that Aid the Church in Need are doing, and also hear directly from some of these women, particularly Neha and Rebecca, and what they have gone through and what they have been suffering. And we realise how fortunate we are in many, many ways to be in this country. We don't always find it easy to be people of faith, but we have it relatively easy compared to what they are going through. So we pray for them, we pray for others like them, especially women who are suffering because they're women, because of their faith, and for the families who are affected. And we thank you for people who have the training and the legal background to try and take some of these things forward. We thank you for the encouragement that in Nigeria, it does seem to be possible to challenge and go through the courts and take a legal process, but in Pakistan, less so. And we realize these are only a couple of the countries around the world where Christians are suffering. So, Father, we commit them tonight into your hands. We commit ourselves into your hands. And we pray that you will help us to continue thinking and praying and giving for this work, and not to forget it as we leave this meeting tonight. So we thank you again and commit ourselves into your hands in Jesus' name. Amen. So finally, John, especially thank you to you for your presentation. And I know you've done a lot of work on the reports. Thank you very much, Lorraine and Claire, for giving us an angle on what's happening here. And may I wish everybody a good night, and thank you again for attending. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.